everyone, and welcome to another Garden City Arts online program. My name is Katie Guthrie, and I'm going to be your instructor for the day. Today you are watching a painting tutorial video. Now, this segment that you are enjoying right now is kind of the introduction to the beginner video where I tell you about all the materials you need to have. So if you've already watched this once, no worries. I'm sorry you have to hear it again. You can just fast forward. The segment is about 5 minutes long, so just jump forward in the video and you can get to painting. Now, if you haven't watched it before, we're gonna talk about supplies. Really fast, let's talk about brushes. It might surprise you, you really don't need a lot of brushes when you are making a painting. Sometimes I only use one brush the entire time. So keep in mind you don't have to go out and buy like a really big set. There's only really 3 brushes that I would recommend you to go ahead and get or have on hand. I'm gonna hold them up close so you can see. The first is the wash brush, and the wash brush is very thick. It holds a lot of water, and it is generally a pretty big brush. It's great for covering in areas. So you'll want to have a wash brush. You don't have to have a 1-inch wash brush like this one that I'm showing you. You could get away with doing like a 5/8 or a 1/2-inch wash brush. That's absolutely fine. Shader brush. This guy is absolutely essential to have. This is a number 6 shader. As long as you have something close to a number 6, you are good. I wouldn't go as small as a number 4 or number 2. I would keep with 6 or an 8 shader brush. You'll notice it looks very similar to the wash brush, except it doesn't have quite as many bristles, so it's not as absorbent. It doesn't retain as much water, and it is really great for working in detail. So shader brush is absolutely essential. Make sure you have this guy. The round brush, you can take him or leave him. He's not my favorite brush, but he is kind of important sometimes. So the round brush has kind of a point like a pencil, and this guy is a number 4 round brush. I would stick with something around there. You could get a smaller round brush, that's absolutely fine. They're kind of difficult to use the smaller they get, so keep that in mind. So you'll want to have a wash brush, a shader brush, and a round brush. Of any size, whatever works. This is kind of the theme of all of these online courses, whatever works. Next, you'll want to have some chalk on hand. Chalk, like chalk pastels, basically, is a tool that is absolutely essential for painters. This is something that we use to draw, and it's easily erasable. It also kind of disappears behind paint, so it's a great tool to have. I would suggest having chalk of various colors, white, orange, blue, just because it depends on the canvas that you're working on. Sometimes white doesn't show up, so it's good to have different colors. If you can't find any chalk, if you don't have any on hand, it's okay to use a pencil. Again, the theme is whatever works. We're making it work to get some art made. But pencils are not the best because graphite shows through paint after a while, and also it's harder to erase on your canvas. You might have little pencil marks left behind. So I don't recommend it, but you can use a pencil if you have to. The other things that are absolutely essential to have for this upcoming class is to have a container to wash out your brushes. Okay, it can be anything, old tuna cans, cat cans, whatever. You'll want to have lots of paper towels. Most people go through quite a few. And then you'll also want to have a surface to paint on. Now, you need to have your surface primed in the color that we told you to do. So sometimes we start with red backgrounds, tan backgrounds, blue backgrounds, what have you. You need to have your canvas already painted that color. The reason for that is that the way I teach these videos, we start on a colored ground surface to kind of help us out to save some time. So it's absolutely important that you have that done in advance before you start the video. As far as painting surfaces go, really you could use just about anything. If you really want to paint and you don't have a canvas, no stress. You could use something as simple as cardboard. Just keep in mind that it's not meant to be painted on, so you're gonna run into some issues. It's gonna be kind of difficult. It's also gonna be very absorbent, so you'll want to have like maybe 2 layers of paint laid on there so that it's not soaking in or sucking up the paint. You could use like a cover on a book, an old book that you're not using anymore, rip it off and paint on that. You could use acrylic paper. They do make paper that is thick enough to take heavy-bodied acrylic paint. Not the best options, but they do work. If you have a bunch of stretched canvases at home, this is definitely the way to go. It's going to be archival, which means it'll last longer and you'll be happier with it in the end. So, paintbrushes, miscellaneous tools, your surface. Let's talk about paint now. I would recommend having a heavy-bodied acrylic paint. Heavy-bodied basically means that it's heavier. The pigmentation is denser, so it's not quite as runny and it's not as light in color as some of your craft paints that you get like at a craft store or Walmart or something like that. So heavy-bodied acrylic paints would be my recommendation. Master's Touch, Liquitex are two brands that you can get at Hobby Lobby. If you really need one, you can go there. Those aren't my favorite brands, to be honest. Dick Blick is an online art store, and they have really good, reasonably priced paint. It's the Studio Dick Blick brand that I really like and that we use at the gallery all of the time. Color-wise, just depends on the painting you're doing, but I recommend having a cadmium red medium hue, cadmium yellow medium hue, cerulean blue, an ultramarine blue, a quinacridone, which is basically a fancy word for magenta, and the last two I'd recommend would be your titanium white and your Mars black. You can get away with just having those seven colors and mixing those. I rarely buy secondary colors unless it's absolutely essential. Another one that you could have on hand if you are willing to buy extra paint would be burnt sienna. That would be a really good one to have as well, and that's a brown. So that concludes my little introduction on supplies. I will get into like teaching you the basics of painting in the video. So I hope you have a wonderful time. Sit back and relax, and I hope this is a good de-stressor for you. Have fun! Welcome to Canvas and Paint, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are drawing or painting. I don't know what we're doing. We're painting the little heart on the beach scene that you can see on the left side of your screen. And I'm going to walk you through this step by step. Before I do, let's quickly talk about a few basics. These are the colors we're going to be using today, and make sure that you have some brushes. You can get away with using a smaller shader brush today, but I did whip out my 1-inch wash brush because I want to cover ground kind of fast, especially when I am demonstrating for you on video and you have to watch me. We also need our palette knife because we are going to do some color mixing today. And just a quick reminder for everyone, just in case you didn't watch the last video, when you use a brush for the first time, you want to prime it by dipping it in paint water and then patting it dry. What will happen is that your brush will be nice and cool and damp to the touch. It should not be dripping. If it's dripping water, it's going to drip water all over your canvas and cause chaos. So make sure you're priming your brush as you go. Make sure you're using your palette knife to mix your colors. If you don't have one of these little handy doodads, you can use a brush. Just make sure you clean it out really well. So let's get started. The very first thing we need to do is mix our sand color. Now we're starting out on a tan canvas, so that's going to help us, but we need a lighter tan to go on top of it. And then we can allow some of the darker tan to kind of pop through. We're going to mix a color that's very close to this tan, but just a little bit different. Instead of using burnt sienna, I'm using a burnt umber for my sand. The reason for that is just so that it sticks out a little bit. And I'm mixing a little bit of yellow into it as well. So the majority is white, a little tiny bit of brown, and a little bit of yellow just to warm up that burnt umber a bit. Okay, now you decide on the color of sand that you're happy with. If you don't like the burnt umber sand, it does kind of look a little dreary, then you can always use burnt sienna instead, or a little bit of red to kind of warm up your blue. I'm happy with that. I'm gonna just call it good. I'm gonna use my 1/2" wash brush to get started with, and I'm gonna be doing a whole bunch of this little dotting motion. It's to create kind of a sandy texture on our beach. This is just layer 1 of many on our sand, so keep in mind that it's not going to look perfect on this first step. We're just making texture. So after I do a few dotting motions, I also like to scribble. Be kind to your brush, don't be too mean to it. Kind of wave it back and forth, treat it gently. And the goal is to let some of my underpainting show through and cover up other areas. You'll notice that when you mix water into your paint, it makes the water more transparent so you can see through it. If you use less water and just more paint, it will make it, your paint will be much more opaque when you're applying it onto your canvas. And so you can build up layers by starting with transparent washes and then dotting in some heavier texture on top of it. It's a really great way to create a sandy looking beach. I'm gonna just quickly move on. And just 1 second. Okay, I'm happy with that beach for now. Remember, it's just layer 1 of several, so don't stress if it's not exactly how you want it. Even though I'm a perfectionist, I'm kind of going against my own advice. Okay, so when you're cleaning out your brush, make sure you swirl, tap, and dry. And then we can move on to our waves. Water is one of my favorite things to paint. It's really fun, but you have to remember that we are building layers. So it's not always about covering areas up. Sometimes it's about watering the paint down and creating transparent layers, okay? So the first layer we're gonna lay down is going to be our darkest blue, and we want this to be pretty opaque and solid. After this point, we can start kind of building up our layers. The very first thing I'm gonna do, I'm gonna start in this corner and darken it up, and then start creating some waves after that. So I'm applying the paint quite thick. I'm using an ultramarine blue, which is our darkest blue that we have on our palette. And it's okay if your paint gets a little transparent. No stress. You want it fairly opaque in most areas. If it gets a little transparent in others, that's okay. I'm going to put in another wave that starts on my right side and goes to my left side. The waves are really obvious because I am making these big, huge mounds and then creating a little swoop and going back up again. You can use the top edge of your brush or the side. The side will fill in space. The top will create thinner lines. So top of the brush, more detail, more controlled. Oh boy, that was not meant to happen. But you know what? We'll just make it work. It's a wave now. So top of the brush, more detailed work. Side of the brush, filling in. So what we're doing is we're establishing the darkest parts of our waves, wherever we're going to have the darkest sections. Yours doesn't have to look exactly like mine. Mine isn't exactly like the original. It's okay, no stress. Now, I have enough dark blue to get started. I can always come back in and add some more later, but I'm gonna call it good for now, and I'm gonna swirl, tap, and dry my brush once I get all the extra paint off of it. Now my next step is to start building my ocean. Right now I just have the dark parts. It doesn't probably look like an ocean or a beach right now. It just kind of looks weird. That's okay. We're going to start adding some more blues and it'll start becoming more water-like. Now, the goal is to have some dark areas and some light areas. The light areas are going to be where we'll put in the crest for the waves eventually. The dark areas are going to be where there's not a crest and it's maybe deeper down into the ocean. So you want to put dark next to light, and you want to blend a little bit. So I'm going to grab a little bit of cerulean blue. I'm going to use the top edge of my brush because I am blending and creating more details. And I'm going to establish where my beach is going to begin and where my ocean is going to end. Like I said, water is one of my favorite things to paint. If you think about it in layers and let it build gradually, things will go well. Remember, you can always skip back to the dark blue if you were adjusting like I was. And then I'm going to continue on with my cerulean blue. I'm going to get it a little bit darker and thicker and more opaque right here. And then as it comes over, I can let it be more transparent and really let some of that underpainting show through. Also, if you go back and forth with the broad part of your brush, you can really mix the ultramarine and the cerulean blue together, and that will create a nice blending effect. Now, I'm not going to mess too much more with this because it is drying. Acrylic paint, you have to build it up in layers. If I keep going over the same area, I'm not going to cover up more, I'm going to take paint off. So I'm going to leave it. I can come back to it in a little bit. I'm going to instead just kind of start at the top of where my beach is and work my way down deeper into my ocean. So this is what I meant by putting dark next to light. I am not blending. I'm making the cerulean blue go right up to the ultramarine blue, but I want that dark and that light to kind of stay as it is. I don't want it to be blended. Now, the way the lighting is, it's hard for me to tell kind of what I'm doing, so I'm going to pick my canvas up every once in a while and check on it, make sure that these little areas of tan popping through don't stick around. Remember, we can always do a second layer, so it's okay if you have some tan popping through at this point. It's not a big deal. We'll come back and fix it in a little bit. Okay, so I have darks, lights thrown in. I have quite a bit of tan popping through still, but that's okay. I could go over it with another layer of paint if I was really concerned about it, but quite frankly, I know that this is just the first layer and I can come back to it and keep working on it in a little bit. So I'm going to let it dry, leave it alone for now. I know it doesn't look pretty. That's okay. We'll come back to it. So by now, parts of your beach should be fairly dry. There might be some areas that are a little bit thicker, more opaque areas where you applied more opaque paint, I should say, that might be still drying right here for me. But the part that I really want to work on, where I'm going to put the heart, is nice and dry. So, yay! I'm going to start putting in that heart now, and I'll come back to the beach. Sorry, I'll come back to the ocean in a little bit. So, our hearts, if you want, you can put a little dot for where your heart is going to come down. I'm going to keep that in mind and draw kind of my basic idea for my heart. Okay, so the reason we are using chalk, sorry for not going over this, is because we can erase it, unlike pencil, very easily by taking a clean damp brush and scrubbing at it. So I just take a clean damp brush, kind of scribble back and forth, and it lifts up that paint and takes it off. So the chalk is great for that reason. You can erase easily, and when we paint over it, it will disappear and no one will know you used it. If you don't have chalk, that's okay. You can use pencil. I don't recommend it, but it is okay if you really need it. So I'm going to move on to my round brush because it's the first time we've used it. I'm dipping in paint water and patting it dry to prime it and get it ready. And now I'm going to take just straight burnt umber, and I am going to put in my heart. So I'm going to go along my chalk lines, and remember this is drawn in the sand, so it doesn't have to be perfect. It can be thicker in areas and thinner in areas and other areas. The main thing is that we want it pretty heavy and solid in at least a few parts. So I'm going to make it really solid right here, and then it's going to get thinner as it goes around and then come back to being solid. Now, I am not thrilled about how I ended that heart, so I'm going to take my clean damp brush and I'm going to erase the paint. You can erase the paint if you hit it before it dries. And basically what you do is very similar to how you erase the chalk. You take your clean damp brush and you scribble it back and forth, and then I push it back into line where I want it. Okay, so I have the dark line drawn. If we were to just leave it how it was, it wouldn't really look natural, like someone drew it into the beach. We need to make it look like the sand is being disrupted as we're drawing through. When you draw through the sand, there's like little clumps of sand that kind of form, little balls of sand. So I am going to grab some of this color that I was using for the original beach, and I'm going to put it in a separate pile, and I'm going to grab a little bit of white and mix a lighter version. I'm being bad, I'm using my paintbrush. I don't recommend it. I usually recommend using your palette knife, but I already did it, and it's a bad habit, hard to break. And then I'm also going to mix a darker version of this by mixing some more burnt umber into it. So now I have the original, I have a light version, and I have a dark version. Once you have your brush nice and clean, we're going to start dark and work our way to light. So I'm going to grab some of this dark, and I'm using my shader brush, and I'm making sure I only have paint on the top edge of my shader brush. I'm controlling it, and I'm going to come right up to that line and do a whole bunch of dotting and maybe even some swiping. I'm also going to disrupt that perfect line so that it looks a little bit more scratchy. Now I'm going to focus this dark wherever I feel like it's deepest. So the thin part of my line, I'm not going to put it there. The thicker parts of my black line, I'm going to put this because it's more of a crevice. It's deeper down in the sand. And keep in mind that you don't want to do the exact same thing everywhere. That is the easiest way to make it look painted and not realistic. If you think about adding variety and having some areas that are darker, some areas that are lighter, some areas that are thicker, and some areas that maybe don't get any of the dark paint, it's going to feel more natural, more organic. So I have my darkest color. Now I can come in with my medium. That was the original color that I went over the beach with. And I can just scratch and scrape. I can put it on a few different places. I like to do this little patting motion. I think that it really helps make areas, whatever you're painting, look more dynamic and interesting rather than just flat, solid layers of color. And because we're working pretty fast, that original paint that I put down, the dark version of this, is still wet, so I can play with it and kind of blend it. And by tapping a whole bunch, it is going to help blend. Again, I'm not treating all parts of the heart exactly the same way. I might come in and almost completely erase it. Maybe someone got really light with their line that they were drawing right there in the sand. Maybe I'll come over and dot a little bit more on this side. Okay, that's starting to look pretty decent. Now, I'm gonna come in with this brush and I'm gonna do another layer on my sand. I'm going to kind of get my beach exactly how I want it. From after we're done with the heart and done with the beach, we're done. We're not gonna touch the beach again. We're gonna focus just on the ocean because that will take quite a bit of our time. So let's just finish up, get it exactly how you want it. This is the second layer. Remember, you can add some water to your paint to make it more transparent. I would make sure that you're letting some of the original color of your canvas kind of pop through in places. And don't worry about how the beach meets the ocean. We're not worrying about that yet. We'll worry about that in a little bit. So it's okay if it looks a little weird. Okay, now I have my lightest version of the original tan that we created, still waiting to be used. I can come in and do little tiny patches of this light color. I can go back to my shader brush if I'm more comfortable. If you can go back to your shader brush, sorry, if you're more comfortable with that. But I like using a little bit of a bigger brush. Gets the job done faster. Okay, I am just about finished with my beach. Remember, you can smooth things out and blend them a little bit if you feel like it's too bumpy. There's too much texture, that's okay. And you can always go back a step and add some dark if you feel like it's needed. Okay, so I'm fairly happy with my beach. Even though I said we're not coming back and touching it, remember, you can always do that. You can break the teacher's rules. So you can come back in and be like, I don't like how that dried. I'm gonna do some touch-ups. That's fine, no stress. I'm gonna try to avoid doing that just so that we can move on to our ocean and all that good stuff. So let's move on to our ocean and all that good stuff. This next layer of paint, I want to make sure that I don't have any tan popping through. So that's my goal for my second layer. My first layer in most areas has dried. There's a few wet places still, but that's okay if we hit those, no stress. Most of the lighter areas have dried, and that's really what we're worried about. So I'm gonna go in with my 1-inch brush. You can always go in with a smaller wash brush. And I'm going to start making sure that my darks are nice and dark, kind of doing touch-ups. If there's any tan popping through, I'm fixing that now. And then after I have my ultramarine done, you can do long brush strokes or you can do little short ones like I'm doing, tapping it. After I've made sure that my dark blue is done, I'll come in with my light blue and I will start blending a little bit more. I want it to be darker down here and get lighter as it comes up. So I'm going to concentrate my dark blue efforts down below where it's further away from the beach. And then as I come up, that's where I can start adding more cerulean blue. We're also going to take a break here in a second and mix another color. But I want to get the bottom half of my canvas done first. Sorry guys, I can't see with the glare of the lights. Okay, so the bottom half I'm happy with. I can swirl, tap, and dry my brush. The top half of my ocean, I am going to start utilizing a tint of my cerulean blue. A tint of a color is just where you've mixed white into it to make it lighter. And so I am going to make a lighter version, or a tint, of this cerulean blue, so that it really looks like the bottom of my canvas is darker, and as I'm moving up and getting closer to the beach where the water's thinning out, it's getting lighter. That's really important. It'll create a lot of depth in your piece if you accomplish this. Now, we're going to be doing a lot of blending. Blending is easiest to do wet on wet, so the layer underneath needs to be wet, and then what you're introducing to the canvas also obviously needs to be wet. Now, if you're doing wet on dry, which is kind of what we're going to be doing as we move up, you want to have more transparent layers of paint. So kind of water it down a little bit, and you're letting some of the paint underneath pop through, and that's what causes the blend. Now, I'm not going back and forth flattening it out. I am focusing on the curves of my ocean, the waves, if you will. I'm taking a little bit of dark and just kind of introducing that dark right along that line so that there's more of a transition. Remember, if you're struggling, swirl, tap, and dry your brush, clean it out. That will help you a lot. Okay. Oftentimes your brush is just so heavy and thick with paint that maybe there's dark blue, cerulean blue, and light cerulean blue all mixed in the same brush, and that's why it's muddying your colors and making it difficult. So keep that in mind. I'm using my thin part of my brush to come in and start adding some details up high. So I'm using really opaque paint that hasn't been watered down, to create some details and some interest right there. I can also take some of this and throw it in every once in a while wherever I feel like the water might need it. Wherever I'm going to put a crest in, I can start mapping that out by putting in some lighter areas. It's kind of planning. So obviously this doesn't go in the dark area. You want to keep it separate from the dark area. It goes right below or on top of the dark area where you're wanting your crest to kind of break. Okay. Sorry, once again, I can't see it, so I'm just checking to make sure that I'm not doing something absolutely crazy. Okay, so I'm pretty much happy with my water. As your beach dries, it's going to change. So again, if you need to come back in and do some touch-ups to your beach, feel free. I'm going to try to not to do that just so that you don't have to sit here and watch me on the video. Instead, I'm going to move on to start working on the waves. Now, this needs to be dry, so I'm going to let this sit and dry for a little bit and turn my attention to my painting palette. I'm going to mix up some light blues. We already have the start of some light blues, but this was for the water. Now we need some light blues for the crest of the wave. So we're going to use the majority white and just a touch of the light blue to mix in. So basically we're making like a baby blue or very, 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 very light blue. And this is going to help us when we start establishing the crest of the wave and some of the little bubbles that are going to pop off the wave. I want to make sure I mix quite a bit. And once I have one pile of this, I'm going to take a second, grab some of the tint of the cerulean blue, so it's kind of more of a medium blue at this point, and I'm going to grab some bright aqua green. Bright aqua green is basically just a blue with a little bit of extra yellow into it so that it turns more into a blue-green than a regular blue. So if you have bright aqua green, use that. If you don't, no stress, just put some yellow into it and it'll start making it more of a blue-green. You want kind of like an emeraldy color. Okay, there we go. So I have my emeraldy blue-green and I have my light blue, and I'm going to use a lot of white as well on this next step. Now that I have my colors mixed, I can come back to my canvas and I'm going to work from the top of my ocean down to the bottom. So we go from dark to light. I'm going to grab my shader brush. I was mistaken. I'm going to grab my round brush, and my round brush fell somewhere on the floor. So make sure that it's nice and primed, and then I'm going to start from dark and work my way to light. So I'm going to start with my light blue, which is the darkest of the white and the light blue. So I'm going to start with light blue and then I'll work my way to a lighter color, which is going to be white. I'm going to start by making a little circular motion right along my ocean. So some areas can be really short and small, others can be maybe a little bit bigger and taller. I'm using my round brush because it is really good at making these very quick curvy lines. And this is for where our wave is breaking. If you want, you can really, it depends on what kind of painter you are. If you are more cartoony, then you'll want clean, crisp lines. So you'll mix some water into your paint for those clean, crisp lines. If you like more realistic looking art, or somewhere in between that, you can let some of this blend into the wet paint that is underneath it, and it will create kind of some dark areas on these little circles that we're painting in. It's really up to you and what you want to do. Remember, this is your painting, so you can do whatever you want. Okay, so I have the start of my waves. I have my dark blue, well, my light blue, my darkest color of my wave, of my crest of my waves, established. I'm just going to go in and make sure that it's nice and thick. I shouldn't see any tan popping through, or very little, I should say. Maybe closer to the tops of the crest of the wave where it's foamiest. Remember, if your paint is looking dry and scratchy, mix some water into your paint. And now I'm going to grab some white. That's light blue. I'm grabbing white, my bad. And I'm going to come in here with my white. I'm going to make sure that I have some water mixed into it so that it's a bit more transparent. There we go. And what will happen is that your blue and your white will kind of mix together. We want some areas where it's really white, and we want other areas where it's more of a lighter version of this light blue. And you accomplish that by painting in layers. All right, so I have my first layer. I'm going to swirl, tap, and dry my brush, and I'm going to grab just straight white, and I'm going to come in and put these very stark highlights right on top of my wave. This is going to make it look more cartoony and less realistic. If you are going for more of a realistic look, then you are never going to use straight white. That really kind of looks a little off, doesn't look as natural. But I'm doing it because I want more of a cartoony look. Okay. All right, so I have the crest of my wave kind of done for now. If you feel like, if you take a step back and you're like, oh, they're all at the exact same height, you can always come back in and make some a little bit bigger. I'm gonna do that really fast. Okay. And now I'm going to move down. I'm going to go back to my light blue, and I'm going to start putting in kind of the crests of the wave as we work our way down the ocean. So I am not putting them in any dark areas. I'm putting them on like the crest of the lightest areas. So right here I'm going to put a little crest. Make sure you mix some water into your paint so it's nice and fluid. Right here I'm going to put a nice little crest. They can be a little bit thicker or thinner. Just make sure they're more scribbly and curvy. They shouldn't be flat lines. Flat lines will just totally kill any kind of movement that you have been working on and trying to make with your waves. Remember, if you want your wave to be more natural looking, then you are going to mix a lot more water into it to let it be really transparent kind of at the bottom, and then it gets more solid and opaque, less water, at the top. Okay, if you're going for more of a cartoony look, no stress, you can just put in a thick line. Still needs to be curvy though. Okay, so I have the start of the crest of my waves. I'm going to flip my brush over to the back end, and I'm going to start grabbing some of my blue-green, and I'm going to start putting in some dots. Okay, some of these dots are going to be, nix that, don't do that. I'm going to use the light blue for the dots. My bad. This color is going to be used to put in little tiny areas of light blue, just to make it look like your ocean is not one solid color. And it also is going to be kind of used to cover up any areas where your teal might be popping through. You're going to really water it down and create these fun little lines where you're letting the underpainting kind of pop through. Okay, so that's what that color's for. You're going to use light blue to dot on the tops of these. You can use the back end of your brush to do little dots, or you can use the actual part of your brush to make those dots a little bit bigger. I put this right on the tops of the crest of the waves. I'm also going to do that to my wave right here that's breaking onto the beach. I can also use just straight white depending on where I'm at. If I'm on the beach, I would say straight white would be just fine. especially if you use some already on the tops of your crests or waves. So what I'm doing is I'm dotting right along the very top part of the crest. It just creates a little bit of like a foam look. So we're letting some of the underpainting pop through so that, again, it looks more foamy and not so solid. And you don't have to do it everywhere. Remember, to make it more realistic, you kind of pick and choose what spots you want to do this, where you think it'll have the most effect or impact. And now I'm going to go back to the dark blue to kind of do this. I can also take little highlights of white right on the tops of the crest of the wave. The tops are going to be closer to the top of the canvas. The bottoms of the waves are going to be closer to the bottom or the ocean. And once I'm happy with the amount of dots that I have, I am pretty much done. I can do some different touch-ups. I can add more of the blue-green to kind of make it more dynamic and not just one blue or two blues. It will make it feel more like you're looking through water as opposed to just a blue painted object on a canvas. And I can also go back to my beach. I can do some more to make that heart feel like it's part of the sand. For instance, I can come back in and do like another layer of dots if I feel like it's not sandy enough. Really, that's about all we're going to do. So you can just do some touch-ups, go at your own pace, do your own thing, add what you think you want or need. You could go for adding like a little starfish on your beach instead of a heart, sandals, whatever. If you feel like you are competent to do some different things with this canvas, please feel free. It's a really fun painting. There's a lot going on. Again, you can kind of go on and do more if you want, add more touches, add more foam. But really, after a while, you get to the point where you realize that you're done. Listen to that voice. Don't keep going. Don't say, oh, I'll just do this one more thing. Because when you do that one more thing, oftentimes it's a mistake. And then you have to spend a lot of time trying to fix it. So really, this is all I'm going to do to this painting. If you want to make it look more cartoony, you can come back in and add, not with that color, you can add with the light blue some little highlights or lines on your waves to separate them. It looks like for the original picture I did use this color, which is crazy. I feel like that's way too dark, but you could, if you want to, use it. I'm not a fan of that. I don't really like cartoony looking things, so I'm going to soften and blend that up and put some light blue back onto it. But if you like the cartoony look and feel of the waves by having some dark blue in there, feel free to do that. And I hope you had a really fun time painting this. I also hope that you have a really good Friday night, and see you again next week.